Hello guys, welcome to another video. So here in this session, we will be talking about a short note on Sanskritization and its relevance in contemporary Indian society. So what could be the introduction that you can give? See, we already completed Sanskritization in one complete session. So this is going to be a 10-minute lecture. So I'll be only focusing on this particular question and how you're going to answer this question. Okay, see, when we talk about Sanskritization, you can talk about Srinivas in the first line itself. So Sanskritization is introduced by Srinivas in his work Religion and Society among the Kurds in South India. So the Kurg, okay, so his study of Kurg is very important. We have used this example in many cases when we talk about caste, when we talk about family. So we know this, right? So, and that refers to the process by which lower caste emulate the practices, the rituals, and the lifestyles of upper caste, particularly Brahmins, to elevate their status in the social hierarchy. So the lower caste, they try to imitate the rituals and the habits and everything of the upper caste, the practices, and then they will try to automatically, if not this generation, at least the next generation will be treated as Brahmins if you follow Brahmins. And it is not necessarily Brahmins, it could be the dominant caste in that area. If the Kshatriyas are the dominant caste, the Sanskritization towards Kshatriyas. Okay, that's how it is. So Sanskritization means you are trying to elevate your process. It is trying to, it's a kind of mobility. So caste is something which is treated as a closed system. But when we talk about the concept of Sanskritization, this is becoming an open system. So something which is theoretically closed, practically it is open. So this is how, in fact, Indology and G.S. Gurye's approach and all are actually criticized, because the ground reality is different. You may say that, by birth, you're born in a particular caste and you will end in the same caste, but that's not the case. The reality is different. There is a possibility of mobility through Sanskritization. So that's the concept which is given by Srinivas. Similarly, dominant caste that I'll discuss in a different question. We have already covered all these in the actual class. Okay. So when we talk about this, it captures cultural aspirations within the framework of caste stratification, but again remain primarily a positional change rather than a structural one. Right, so this is a positional change, and this concept has sparked extensive debate and analysis, particularly regarding its relevance in contemporary India. Now, what is the question of Sanskritization? If you become a Dalit or if you become an OBC, you are getting a lot of advantages. So there are a lot of discussions whether Sanskritization is there now or de-Sanskritisation is there, whether Brahmins trying to become OBC or even Dalits to get the advantage of Sanskritization. All these are again a different question. So since this concept is there, we need to discuss about this. So what is the definition and process? I hope this is very clear. Talk about that. Sanskritization means adopting the customs of upper caste like vegetarianism, abstinence from liquor, and Brahminical rituals. And these practices reflect a socio-psychological concept of anticipatory socialization, something which we have discussed in Merton, and that is aligning with the Merton's reference group theory. So here, what is your reference group? Either the dominant caste is your reference group, right? So you try to become one of them through this anticipatory socialization over a period of time. If not this generation, next generation will be part of it. That's how this concept is actually. Again, if you look at the cultural secular dimension, the religious aspects include, the changes in food habits, right? The language and the worship practices, etc. Secular aspect, if you look at that, involve education, economic status, and the occupational mobility. Srinivas, in fact, recognized that Sanskritization brings cultural changes but failed to dismantle the caste hierarchy. So there are some cultural changes which have been brought in. Now, if you look at the historical context, Christopher Jeffrelot, in fact, traced similar dynamics in colonial era studies also, where caste mobility was documented by administrators like Atkinson in his Himalayan Gazetteer. So that if you want, you can briefly mention about this. And Srinivas highlighted that, Sanskritization often led to superficial changes that reinforce the caste system rather than undermining it. And you can also talk about the critique by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So Ambedkar viewed Sanskritization as perpetuating the caste system by reinforcing the dominance of upper caste. Right. So I hope this is very clear. We discussed this in detail. And he argued that the real social change requires structural transformation, not this positional mobility. Even if this is mobility, who's your reference group? It is the Brahmins or the Kshatriyas who's dominant. So this is again reinforcing the dominance of that upper caste only, right? So you need, this is just a positional mobility through cultural limitation. What you need is a structural transformation according to Ambedkar. Now, what are the different perspectives? You can talk about Bette view, Panini's observation. There are, many I'll take a couple of which, and I can explain that, not in detail. See, if you look at Bethé, Andre Bethé's view, caste no longer strictly determines one's position in the class or power hierarchy. Economic mobility has diversified the caste identities, making traditional Sanskritization is very less significant at this point of time. You need to elaborate on this if situation demands. If the question is simply about Sanskritization, just mention about this. That's enough. This one line is enough, more than enough. And Panini's observation. Again, caste has adapted to developmental needs, allowing greater occupational flexibility across the caste. So you can briefly mention about this also. Guys, all these are given in detail in the PDF. With each of these, I've given in paragraphs and paragraphs. So go through that if you want a detailed, note. But I'm just looking at the structure of this answer only, okay? Now coming to decline of Sanskritization and the rise of de-Sanskritization. See, the reservation, the affirmative action policies have incentivized the lower caste to retain their identities rather than trying to emulate the upper caste. What is the point in now you changing, right? Because the society is now based on mobility, open system, class system, and everything. So you get education, you get better jobs, you get mobility. Rather than being a Brahmin, you get you get an economic status. Then that is better. So you stay within the lower caste, use the advantage, and get the other advantages. So the rise of Dalit movements and leaders like Kanshiram and Mayavati demonstrates a shift towards caste assertion rather than upward imitation. Okay, so these are again points which you can add here and there. If you look at Dalit perspective, when you criticize, you can talk about these feminist critique, right? You can look at Dalit perspective. You can look at from the perspective of globalization, liberalization, urbanization, and everything. You can also bring in political dimensions. So these are the different dimensions in which you can criticize. But again, depends on the question, depends on the demand of the question. And if it is 10 marker, 20 marker, you need to align it. Hardly one or two criticism is enough if it is 10 marker. Because when you talk about the concepts and explain, that itself will capture around 100 words. Then you're left out with 30 words, and this is enough. Now, what's the Dalit perspective? Dalit scholars and activists argue that the Sanskritization undermined the authenticity of lower caste identities. Intellectuals like Kancha Ilaya, okay, the Ilaya Shepherd. In fact, I exactly don't know how to pronounce it. So Kancha, Ilaya Shepherd, okay, advocate for celebrating lower caste cultures rather than aspiring to assimilate into upper caste practices. Feminist criticism, you can write, feminists highlight that Sanskritization often reinforce the patriarchal norms as lower caste adopt conservative practices like stricter gender roles and restrictions on women to align with the upper caste ideals. So that the feminist criticism on Sanskritization. And you can also talk about, increasing urbanization, globalization, caste-based practices like commensality and endogamy are now declining. Endogamy is now almost, still there, but it's declining. Commensality declining, right? So these are the features that we have seen when we talked about caste, but that's no more there because of globalization, urbanization, and other things. Aspiring lifestyle, right? This new aspirational lifestyle in urban areas often align with consumerist culture rather than caste-based rituals, and reducing the scope of Sanskritization. If you look at political dimension, the political mobilization based on caste identities like Bahujan Samaj Party (BSP) focuses on empowerment and representation rather than Sanskritization. Then policies like reservation in education, employment, right? These encourage lower caste to reclaim their identities rather than trying to emulate the upper caste. So this reservation, the positive affirmation, how the life of lower caste have changed. That's something which you need to talk about. Still, is there any relevance? That's the question. See, we can talk about this also. Sanskritization remains an important concept to understand historical caste dynamics, but its relevance has diminished in contemporary India because of the reasons why, whatever I have told you, right? So the focus has shifted to de-Sanskritization, caste assertion, and identity politics. That is, what more dominant now. So there are shift in aspirations, right? Lower caste now seek political representation, educational access, and economic mobility rather than simply cultural assimilation of the upper caste. You can also talk about structural and positional change. Structural reforms, through affirmative action and legal safeguards have more profound impact than Sanskritization. Then coming to the criticism of cultural limitation. Again, you can talk about contemporary scholars, right? They argue that Sanskritization reinforced caste hierarchies by legitimizing the dominance of upper caste practices. I have already discussed this when we talked about Ambedkar. So what is conclusion? See guys, Sanskritization provided a useful framework to analyze the caste mobility in traditional Indian society, but its inability to address the structural inequalities that limits its application in the contemporary studies. So today, the rise of de-Sanskritization, the Dalit assertion, so the caste assertion, and the caste-based policies, the identity politics all reflect, a shift towards empowerment and identity reclamation. So as India evolves socially and economically, the relevance of Sanskritization lies in its historical significance rather than its applicability to the current dynamics. So to fully understand modern caste relationship, new framework that address the identity politics, the globalization and social justice, etc., are essential. So this is how you can answer the question. So I have tried to incorporate many dimensions. This much is not required if it's a short note. Simply write about what is Sanskritization, what is the criticism, what is its relevance. So I think I have given something more than what we actually discussed in the class. So take care of that, and I'll see you in the next video. If you like the video, share it with your friends also who are preparing with sociology. If you are looking for any sociology mentorship or the course or test series, check out the details in the description, and see you in the next video.